Hello, my name is David Wilson. This is my video for the first session role play. The first question asked is, how would I begin a first meeting in terms of laying out the goals and structure and starting to join with the family in order to gain their trust? So, in the state of role playing, my name is David Wilson. I am your therapist. Thank you, Smith family, for coming forward today to see me and discuss some of the issues and problems going on with you all. Before we begin, I would like to just make a couple statements. Any conversations where there is any disclosure of child or elder abuse, I am a mandated reporter, and I would have to make that report to the proper authorities. So if there are disclosures of child or elder abuse, I am mandated by the law to report that. The second thing is, if there's anyone here that feels the threat of harm or the idea of harming one other or themselves, I am also required to report that to the proper authorities. And if you are in crisis, there are some resources that I have outside of my door that you can get with regards to that. With that being said, do any of you all have any questions about what I just said? I want to make sure we all are understanding of those statements. No? Okay. The next thing I would like to do is sort of lay out some ground rules. The ground rules I would like to lay out really are going to help guide how our sessions are going to go together. The first ground rule I like to have, and I'll put this on the wall so that we can see this throughout our sessions, we can refer back to it, will help keep us in check, is one person speaks at a time. This is very important because I want to make sure that each member of this family has the opportunity to express their own feelings, thoughts, and emotions without any interruptions. The second ground rule is no blaming or shaming. So I want everyone to feel comfortable in talking about certain situations or issues or problems they may see and not have to worry about another family member A, interrupting them, or B, blaming or shaming them for coming forward about it. Number 3. I would like to say that what sort of stays in this room remains in this room. This is confidential, so your personal information is not going to be shared with anyone other than the first couple disclaimers I made early on. So that being said, things will remain private. I'm not going to share this with anyone on the elevators or with the bartender down the street. And role play. So I really would initially start off by laying out these goals, these main ground rules, so that the family understands ahead of time. This is sort of how things are. I would also write them down so that the family can refer back to them. And the reason I would do that is to answer the second segment's question. But back to the first. In order to sort of gain the trust of the family, I would go through sort of, as Weber describes, the social phase of the outline that he has within the text of the article. And the reason I like the social phase is more so because you're interacting with each family member and asking questions, and that is to obtain more and more information about the family members themselves and how they perceive themselves. So I like this stage primarily because I'm able to really gather information on Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, little Johnny Smith, and Jane Smith. I'm able to really gather how each of those individuals perceive themselves. I would ask them a question a little bit about themselves, something their interests, so I can sort of understand their passions, where they're sort of drawn towards. Also some demographics, obviously with the case study that we received ahead of time, it talks about some of the issues with Mrs. Smith's parents and Mr. Smith's parents and their upbringings as children themselves, as well as some family history with regards to addiction as well as mental health. And so I would ask the family members or at least the parents in a sense, to sort of explain the demographics, their upbringing, and sort of gather that information so I can have that moving forward. Now, when in order to get the family to really join in together, I would ask probably questions surrounding how Jane might view Johnny's behavior, and Johnny viewing Jane's behavior, and same with Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith, just so that certain things are aired out, the perceptions and assumptions that different family members have of the other family member is sort of out in the open, so that it can be talked about and discussed. And that sort of is how the first session will be. It's sort of going to be tackling assumptions and presumptions. And the reason I think that is important is because when individuals have these perceptions, and these assumptions, that they make judgments and make decisions based on that, when it may not be fact or truth. So to dive into the second segment, what might I say to interrupt any bickering, blaming, or the parents may start to do with each other? So back to the role play, I would say, Mr. Smith, I would like to remind you the ground rules on the wall. We do want to make sure that Mrs. Smith has the opportunity to speak. It is our number one ground rule, which is one person speaks at a time, and it's followed by the next one, which is no blaming or shaming. So I know there's going to be certain things that are said, and I know that it may bring out some emotion that you want to express. And you will have your opportunity directly after Mrs. Smith is finished, but it's very important that Mrs. Smith is able to articulate her thoughts and feelings and not have to feel blamed or shamed. And the same respects will be offered to you. Are we on the same page? Because I know we talked about these ground rules initially and we want to make sure we follow them throughout our sessions. Great. And role play. So really, I would address these interruptions and bickerings by references back to the ground rules, references back to the agreement that all the family members made to the ground rules before the start of the session. It's sort of our unspoken contract. This is how things are going to go. This is how everyone gets the opportunity to speak and be heard without being sort of pushed in the back of the room. With regards to the third segment, how might I end a session, including any homework that I might suggest to help them meet their goals and set for themselves? So because I dove into some of the demographic pieces of the social phase that Weber highlights, and I was able to sort of highlight the ground rules and the goals of our session, the main purpose was for me to sort of break those, as Satir did, those sort of assumptions and perceptions that one family member have of another. So by being able to break that, I would probably do similar aspects that Satir did, maybe role-playing, actually standing up and physically moving around so that each family member can sort of understand not only each other's assumptions of the behaviors, so maybe mom or dad's perception or assumption of why Jane attempted suicide by this drug overdose, and then hearing from Jane herself, if she's comfortable, explaining why she sort of went through that. Because the truth is if father or mother believe that Jane did this because of A, but Jane did this because of B, the assumption's there, but the wrong type of communication is going on, and there's not the proper amount of treatment being offered to sort of address the issues and tackle the problems. And it goes the same with Mr. and Mrs. Smith's sharing of duties, household duties, given Mr. Smith doesn't work because of his disability, and Mrs. Smith feeling that she's carrying a lot of the load. So I would really address the first session that way, and tackle each of those issues as they come, but really having that strong foundation, the strong ground rules that were set forth in the beginning so that I could tackle any interruptions, and when I really end it, really leave them with that homework so that through the communication that we sort of work on in the first session, so whether it's through a certain type of phrasing, so for instance, if Mr. Smith doesn't feel like doing any laundry, him being able to say, Mrs. Smith, I don't feel like doing this laundry right now. I don't feel like doing laundry because I am irritated, because I feel that I'm stuck at home and I'm frustrated because I can't get a job. Versus Mrs. Smith then responding saying, I hear you, Mr. Smith. However, I'm also working a lot and it doesn't take that much time and it really would help me out. So really having that ability to communicate in a calm way and express exactly what they're thinking, what they're feeling, would help benefit the whole family, but really help tackle some of the assumptions and some of those perceptions that the family members have of each other as well as themselves.